Yeah, so I suppose the last point I want to talk about today as we come towards the end is a point about the future of cars. And one of the things that this podcast is all about is about car culture and, understanding what different groups of people experience and speak possibly to what the future might be for cars. As I've said in the previous podcast, I think we're at this really interesting point where kind of at this crossroads, petrol engines are kind of doing their last dance, so to speak. They've kind of been developed as much as they're going to be developed, according to many manufacturers such as Mercedes. And electric cars are becoming a more commonplace in the a more commonplace experience and a more commonplace feature in our day-to-day driving. We're seeing cars charging outside the road, cars charging at lampposts, going to supermarkets or shopping centres or the mall, if you call it that, and seeing that there's charging stations there. I think it's a really interesting thing. And so one of the things I do look to do with this podcast is hopefully start to speak to more people in the audience out there. So if you've got someone that you think might be quite good for this podcast, then please do share this with them, and hopefully I can have a sit down with them and talk to them about their experience about sort of in the past, but also possibly the future, and seeing where things are going. So whoever that might be, someone with an interesting car, someone who's maybe part of a car club, or if you're a car designer, or if you're studying automotive engineering, or you're studying, about cars, maybe you work in a car factory, whatever that might be. I think I'm really keen to speak to people from all different walks of life and to share that experience with people on this podcast. So I am considering and looking to kind of speak to some of my friends about their experiences with cars as well. I think I may have someone on the next podcast, so do watch out for that. That's it. The future of cars. I was browsing YouTube, as I do often, and I came across someone who was 3D printing a Lamborghini Aventador. And that really got me thinking about the future of cars and how that future might look. And what was really cool about this is that it's this sort of father and son team, and I think they're one of maybe only 5 people in the world who are doing this. And they basically bought like a sort of hobby grade, or sort of like a kind of 3D printer that you buy to use in your house. And they've gotten quite a long way with this and had to buy another one later on. But the main thing was that they were 3D printing this Lamborghini. And so they'd got a scale model, I think it was like a 1/10 scale, a model of a Lamborghini. And they kind of measured it and kind of created parts in SolidWorks, which is what's called a 3D authoring software. Basically, it's software that you can design parts in 3-dimensional space in. And so they've been sort of measuring parts on this scale model, and then kind of using that to help them create parts for a Lamborghini. Now, there's a couple of things I want to say is that as much as the whole car was 3D printed, it's a bit of a caveat in that the car sat on top of a space frame. So if you think of tubes of steel welded together, and it had like obviously an engine from, I think it was like an LS engine with a Porsche gearbox on it. And there's a kit you can buy apparently. I don't know too much about it, but it did seem quite interesting. And so the base of the car is space frame, sort of kind of like a kit car you'd have, I suppose, in some ways. And then the body on top and the different parts inside have been 3D printed. Now, I think what was really cool about this is that this kind of got me thinking about the future, where, at the moment now, 3D printing technology is kind of in its still in its relatively early days. It's like the early days of the internet. And I think in the short term, we tend to overestimate how much difference the technology is going to make. And in the long term, we tend to underestimate how much difference the technology is going to make. And I think the internet is a really good example of that. When we look at the internet, we kind of saw it as being a bit of a fad. It's a bit of this like kind of this fun thing that people send people go into chat rooms on and nerds kind of use. But what we've seen the internet become is woven deeply into the fabric of our day-to-day lives, from banking transactions, from YouTube to social media, to emails, to all sorts of things. I think it's fair to say that the internet has become, an integral part of everyone's life on a day-to-day basis. But even if you're just a mum that lets your child watch a bunch of Cocomelon or whatever that might be, it's become something that's a massive part of our day-to-day lives. And so with this sort of 3D printing, that got me thinking, could we be facing a future where maybe there's 3D printing an entire car becomes possible? Maybe if not in the house, there's somewhere you can go, you can kind of get a vehicle 3D printed, or maybe even get parts of your vehicle kind of 3D printed, and or allow that vehicle to be customized more to yourself. I think this is interesting when you look at like how cars have been. Somebody. Hello, how you doing? What? Okay. Good, you? Yeah. So I think this is particularly interesting when you look at like how the car industry has changed in general. We've gone from a lot of manufacturers having a modest number of models. So if you look at Audi, for example, they only had a handful of models in the past. They had the A3, A4, and they had the A2 at a point in time, but that wasn't that long a run. So you had the A3, A4, A6, and A8. And now if you look at the model range that Audi offers, some of them are sort of platform shared cars with other marks in the Audi, the Volkswagen Audi, Vauxhall, in the Volkswagen Audi group, but they've got so many more cars that they offer. So you've got like the Q series of vehicles, the Q3, Q5, Q8. You've got A5, A4, A6, A8, A7, possibly even the A9 in the future. But yeah, I do wonder if, just as we've kind of identified new segments of people or new types of vehicle that kind of fit specific classes of people, so whether that's a sports car or saloon, maybe what we'll see is that manufacturers start to offer customers the opportunity to 3D print certain parts of their car or to customize it through the use of 3D printing. And so it's something that you see at the moment maybe with manufacturers use in terms of rapid prototyping. So what they might do is to help them kind of in the production of cars, in addition to things like the clay model, they also will 3D print components of the car to kind of allow them to test different versions of something really quickly. So, for example, if you have some different ideas for headlights or tail lights, you can 3D print loads of versions of those and kind of get a sense of what they look like on the vehicle quite quickly, and that's pretty cool. But I do wonder if maybe there'll be a case where, if not 3D printing entire vehicles, maybe there's like, or maybe even 3D printing entire vehicles, and there's like a licensed version that you can kind of, or licensing process you can go through. So maybe you print a part of the car and it gets certified by a company like Lamborghini, and they allow you to say, okay, well, you've used the right resin or materials and this meets our standards, and so yeah, this is a Lamborghini approved printed part. But then maybe you'll have like sort of, you know, if you go to like Turkey, you kind of got, is it Turkey I went to? And you've got like the authentic replicas where it's like basically like, I suppose supposed to be high quality fakes. I wonder if that would be a thing, because I don't know what happens when 3D printing technology becomes really cheap or starts to become really good. You know, at the moment there's still lots to be done. I think the people that print that Lamborghini, they actually kind of sandwich some of the parts in carbon fiber to make them stronger, because 3D printed parts have something called I think there's like a glass temperature, and what happens is, if you, like with most cars, you know, you dry them outside in the sun and they're fine. But if you've got like a red car, maybe the paint fades. If you put certain types of plastic out in the sun for a long period of time, then those can crack and lose their strength because of, you know, ultraviolet light. And so there's things that it did around that to kind of overcome that. But I think it was really cool as a experiment into what is possible when it comes to 3D printing, particularly considering that they're not using like industrial 3D printers, they're using kind of consumer grade sort of home workbench style 3D printers. What was interesting about this, I think, was how Lamborghini approached it. And I think Lamborghini supported this build, and they actually featured it in like a Christmas advert. I think a Christmas advert, which I watched before this podcast, so I'll post a link to that on this video somewhere. But yeah, that was really cool. I thought it was really cool that Lamborghini kind of supported it and did like a video around it. And I think what was really, it was quite touching actually. Someone who's really like a car guy, and seeing like this 3D printed Lamborghini Aventador Roadster, I think it was the SV actually, but that aside, was a project that the father and son had built together. And I think what Lamborghini tapped into there for me was this idea of kind of like what it means to be like a petrol head and to be a car guy. And as much as it is about the vehicle, it is also a lot about the community and people and the experiences people have when they're driving. Again, one of the reasons for this podcast is to tap into this sort of idea and to investigate this more. And I think it's a really beautiful example of, I think it's fair to say a luxury goods manufacturer really kind of understanding, or just a manufacturer in general, or a company understanding people and understanding relationships and understanding, I think at that point, for example, that young boy, that moment is forever in his mind. In the advert, what they did was I won't spoil it for you, but you see a real Lamborghini in the advert, And I think that moment where like he kind of looks at the car and just the relationship he has with his dad, I think that's where, you know, you get a true kind of petrol head is born in many ways. You know, you've created like a really memorable experience for him where he felt a great deal of love from his father, and he had this experience in this car, and it's like, wow, like this moment with this car meant so much more than any of the vehicles that were involved, the 3D printed one or the real one that I've seen. And it was interesting that I felt like Lamborghini really understood something there. And I think this is interesting because you contrast it with another company who produces supercars. And I don't say this as a criticism of them, just a comparison. Someday I would like to drive a Ferrari, so I don't want to get myself on any kind of blacklist. But I have a Ferrari, but that's a story for another time. So Ferrari are often kind of seen in the news for writing cease and desist letters to customers even, or people that have their cars for various reasons. So I think two of the quite famous examples or well-known examples are the DJ artist, music artist deadmau5. So he's sort of the guy that has the big head with the ears on. He had a Lamborghini, I'm going to say it's an F430, and he modified the car by changing the badge and sort of wrapping the car with a Nan cat. So you're going to have to Google that, but it's like this meme of this cat that is a piece of toast or something like that. It's kind of like an 8-bit graphic of a cat that is a piece of toast or bread or something. And he has a rainbow flying behind him. And so he modified his car with this wrap, and he also changed the name of the car to Ferrari rather than a Ferrari. And then he changed the logo a bit as well. And so I think what's really interesting here is that Lamborghini kind of sent him the cease and desist. And the idea is that, you know, I understand you need to protect your brand. And so what they've said to him is that, well, we feel that this negatively affects our brand, and so we would like you to stop doing this, otherwise we'll sue you. And so deadmau5 did that. And another one was, I think, the case of a fashion designer called Philip Plein. Is it Philip Plein? I'm probably saying his name wrong. But he posted a picture on his Instagram of a Ferrari that was green with some green shoes that he had designed that were part of his clothing brand. And so he was sent a cease and desist to tell him not to do that because you don't represent us, basically. And so I think this is a really interesting kind of comparison, because I think it's not necessarily, as much as I'd like it to be, a given that, you know, cars are forever seen as like these amazing things that people love, and that the petrol heads exist forever, and there's always going to be a market for the supercar. I don't know that that's a given. As much as I would like it to be, I don't know that that is a given. And I think that looking at the Lamborghini story, although it was a couple of years ago now, I think it's really interesting that they took that route, and I think that they're kind of opening themselves up to new audiences. And I do wonder for Ferrari, who I think have a slightly different kind of racing heritage and pedigree, I understand there's a need for them to protect their brand, and their brand is positioned quite differently from Lamborghini. Lamborghini's maybe seen as a bit more of a what's the word? If there was such thing as an every person supercar or luxury brand, maybe, and maybe Ferrari is a bit more elitist in some ways. I think there's debates to be had there. But I think it's interesting looking at these two different approaches. So one brand's kind of a bit more embracing of things, whereas a lot of the comments on this video, interestingly, on YouTube were like, if this was Ferrari, you'd get a cease and desist. And I'm not saying that there's a right case to go for either one, because for each brand, they've got different ways that they want to protect their product and protect their image. But I do think it's interesting to, when you think about what the future of cars might be like, when you think about, you know, electric cars, and maybe they're making car ownership a bit more like having a product, or we're kind of making it a bit more faceless. Do cars continue to have the same appeal in the future? Does everyone, you know, if you've seen the price of sort of classic cars and classic supercars, they kind of continuously go up. If you want to buy a McLaren F1 when it was new, it was around £1 million. But if you want to buy a McLaren F1 today, you're looking at probably in a region of 10, maybe even £20 million and up. Similar sort of thing for the Ferrari Enzo, LaFerrari, Porsche 918, all these sort of grail kind of cars, and a lot of these really high-end supercars, their prices continue to go up. P1, for example, McLaren P1, again, the list goes on and on and on. But does that continue forever? Possibly, possibly not. I mean, everything at the moment suggests that it does, but as the way that car technology changes and maybe the ownership of cars change, does it make sense to continue to do things in exactly the same way? And, you know, looking at that Lamborghini example, I can't help but feel that it's a good thing that they've done there, and that this idea of kind of introducing like a younger generation to cars and to like the passion and joy that you can get from cars. I think it's something that manufacturers continuously need to do to ensure that their place is still there in the future. Otherwise, potentially maybe you risk going the way of someone like Nokia or BlackBerry, where at one point you're kind of like the thing to have and everyone loves them, but then at some point you kind of seem to be less relevant. Will it happen with? Am I saying this will happen with Ferrari? I doubt it. I strongly doubt it. I think there's enough of a market there and a desire there. We've got a Formula One team, but no one knows for definite what tomorrow holds, and so I do think that it is important that generations get introduced to cars in ways that are meaningful. We can't expect that everyone ends up building a car with their dad on their driveway. I don't think that, maybe that isn't as interesting to young people as it once was, but the idea of 3D printing is this great kind of crossroads of like technology, so it's maybe more interesting to like a young person or to a really young person, and it kind of dovetailing that with cars and the excitement of like a supercar is a great way, I think, to introduce someone to a supercar. I think Lamborghini actually provided like a steering wheel and some headlights, which was really good of them. I think a good example of this is like luxury watches as well. So at the moment, the market for luxury watches is quite big. It goes up and down, as does the economy. But if you've got AP, a Royal Oak or a Rolex, like a Hulk or even a sort of a Submariner or a Nautilus, there's a whole bunch of watches, a Patek, that are only going up in value. And if you can, they're almost like, I don't want to compare them to trainers, but hear what I'm saying. So similar to the way that there exists like a resale market for Jordans. So if you want to get one of these watches, or you want to get a pair of Jordans, you need to get the Jordans when they come out to pay a reasonable price or to pay retail. If you don't get them retail, then resale value goes through the roof. And so it's a similar thing with brands like AP, Rolex, Patek Philippe. If you can even get like an allocation on these watches, which is already itself really hard to get, then you stand to make a lot of money. Their values are going through the roof. That said, I do think that it's dangerous to assume that just because that has been the case, that is always going to be the case. And I think that's important that brands do make efforts to introduce their products to new audiences, particularly sort of long-established brands that seemingly are maybe even too big to fail. I think something like those watch brands could do. And I saw someone mentioned this in the video. So there's a guy called Nico, he's a watch guy on YouTube. And he spoke about this idea of like AP doing a collaboration with Casio, and that this could be an opportunity for them to introduce like the watch and watch ownership to a whole new audience. And I think for something like a watch, it's really an interesting idea because, prior to smartwatches, I've got Apple Watch on today. Prior to smartwatches, there hasn't really been massive advancements in watch technology design. And so having an analog watch, for example, there is no real reason to have an analog watch. Everyone's got a phone. Finding the time is easily available on many devices. We have our phones with us all the time. And so the idea of kind of having like this analog watch that only serves one purpose, I think personally there's something really cool about that, and I love watches. But to a young person in the future, will that still have the same meaning? Is there a reason to care about a watch? Could the brand Rolex be meaningless potentially to someone in the future? Possibly not. I don't think there's anything that suggests that is going to be the case, but I think it's important that you don't make assumptions and that brands continue to make investments in bringing their products and showing their products to a new audience. And so something like that, where you've got a brand like AP collaborating with Casio, potentially brings this idea of kind of watch ownership and what makes sort of watches special to a whole new audience and a whole new level of interest, and kind of secure and guarantee their future. And so I think that's kind of like where I'm going to end today. But I do think it's a really interesting point, though. What does the future look like for ownership? What does luxury mean in the future? Are all these luxury brands going to be viewed the same way? Particularly because this is a car podcast, I'm talking about cars. And again, sometimes I talk about other random things, but what does the future hold? And, what are brands doing today to ensure that there's still going to be an interest in their product tomorrow? If people move towards Teslas and seeing cars as just being something that you own or something that you use or something you have access to, does the desire potentially start to go away for some of the rarer and more exotic vehicles? Possibly not. But either way, let me know your thoughts. I encourage you to get involved in the discourse and comment on this video on YouTube. I'll be doing some more things in the future, hopefully with some other people, and hopefully getting to speak to some interesting brands. There's a company that electrifies Land Rover Defenders who I have a contact at, and so at some point I may have them on this podcast, but I am really keen to start to talk to other people. So if you do have someone that's interested in cars, and I think what's really keen for me is that someone who's like passionate about them or just has an interesting story, then I am keen to speak to those people as well. And so and share this sort of idea of what car culture is and what it might be in the future with others. That said, until next time, take care of yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you in episode or podcast number 4, and hopefully having a name for this podcast. But yeah, until then, take care of yourselves and each other. That's not my sign off. But yeah, until then, peace.